The year is 2030. Picture yourself sitting inside a silent command room, screens glowing, maps stretched across entire walls. You are the leader of a powerful nation locked in rivalry with the United States. You have manpower, you have factories, you have ships, aircraft, and the political will to attempt something no one has ever successfully done. You give an order that will echo through history. Prepare an invasion of the United States. For this thought experiment, let's strip away the obvious first obstacle. Pretend the US military has vanished. No aircraft carriers, no stealth bombers, no submarines, no fighter jets, no marines waiting on the beaches, just land, cities, rivers, mountains, highways, and more than 300 million people living ordinary lives. With the world's most famous armed forces magically removed, does victory suddenly become easy? Not even close. Because what stands in your way is not only soldiers, it is physics, it is distance, it is geography, it is infrastructure, it is society itself, and together, these form one of the most difficult invasion environments on Earth. Before we go any further, a quick note. This video is AI generated for educational purposes only. It is not financial or strategic advice. Do your own research and consult qualified professionals before making decisions. Now let's continue. Imagine the first step of your plan. Getting there. On a globe, the United States looks reachable. On a logistics spreadsheet, it looks like a nightmare. To the east lies the Atlantic Ocean. To the west lies the Pacific Ocean. Not narrow channels. Not short hops. Vast, open stretches of water that take days or weeks to cross even in calm conditions. Public historical records from the Second World War show that one of the largest amphibious operations ever conducted, the Normandy landings, required years of preparation, coordination between multiple major economies, and enormous industrial output. And that crossing was over a body of water measured in tens of miles. Now stretch that challenge across thousands of miles. Even if we speak only in rounded estimates, moving hundreds of thousands of troops across an ocean means more than transporting people. It means food, water, medical supplies, fuel, spare parts, ammunition, replacement vehicles, maintenance crews. Modern armies do not march on courage. They move on logistics. A single mechanized formation can consume massive amounts of fuel daily. Multiply that by hundreds of formations, and you begin to understand the scale. You are not sending a fleet. You are trying to create a floating city of supply ships, escorts, tankers, and repair vessels. And here is the part often overlooked. There are no friendly neighboring staging areas next to the continental United States that can quietly host millions of invading troops. Historically, large invasions depend on nearby allies. Forces assemble, train, stockpile, and rehearse within reach of their objective. The US does not sit beside hostile powers with open borders and deep infrastructure ready for such preparation. Any massive build-up would be visible long before the first ship leaves port. Satellites would see it. Commercial shipping data would reflect it. Insurance markets would react. Commodity prices would spike. Even without a military, an economy as large as America's would not sleep through months of visible mobilization. By the time your first vessel nears North American waters, the population would already know something extraordinary is happening. And then comes another quiet problem: coastlines. The American coastline is not one long, smooth beach. Large sections are rocky, cliff-lined, or battered by strong currents. Suitable deep-water ports are limited. These ports rely on specialized cranes, terminals, and infrastructure to unload heavy vehicles. Those facilities are fragile. Disable the cranes, block the harbor entrance, destroy loading platforms. Suddenly, even ships full of equipment become floating warehouses with no easy way to unload. You are forced to improvise beach landings with heavy machinery, one of the most complex and vulnerable operations in warfare. And this is before meeting organized resistance. At this point, if you're enjoying this type of analytical storytelling, consider subscribing. We explore history, economics, and geopolitics through a realistic lens. Now, suppose you change your plan. Instead of landing directly on American shores, you decide to approach from the north or south. On paper, it sounds clever. In practice, it creates new problems. Let's start with the north. Much of Canada's northern interior is dominated by ancient rock formations, dense forests, wetlands, and thousands of lakes. Population density is extremely low. Road networks are sparse outside major urban corridors. Heavy mechanized forces rely on strong transportation networks. Without them, movement slows to a crawl. Even modern trucks struggle in regions where winter temperatures plunge far below freezing and spring thaws turn ground into deep mud. Any advance southward from Canadian territory would funnel through a limited number of corridors, creating predictable choke points. Predictable routes are a defender's advantage. They allow small groups to disrupt large columns using simple means: collapsed bridges, blocked tunnels, destroyed road sections, or landslides triggered along mountain passes. Now look south. Northern Mexico and the US. Southwest are defined by deserts, arid plains, and rugged terrain. Extreme heat, long distances between water sources, and limited cover create harsh operating conditions even in peacetime. Moving large forces across such environments requires enormous quantities of fuel and water. And once you cross the border, you are still far from the nation's industrial and agricultural heartlands. Distances in North America are deceptive. A journey that appears short on a map can represent days of continuous driving under ideal conditions. In hostile conditions, with damaged roads and constant disruption, those same routes could take weeks. Every additional mile stretches supply lines thinner. History repeatedly shows that overextended supply chains are among the most common causes of campaign failure. From a strategic perspective, attempting to enter the United States through neighboring countries does not simplify the problem, it magnifies it. Now let's imagine something even more improbable. You somehow establish a foothold on the coast. Supplies are flowing, forces are ashore, you're standing on American soil. The next objective is to move inland. This is where the continent itself begins to push back. North America is framed by major mountain systems. On the western side, ranges stretch from Canada down into the southwestern United States. On the eastern side, another vast chain runs from the southeastern states up toward the northeast. These are not just scenic landscapes, they are natural barriers. Mountain warfare favors defenders. Narrow passes restrict movement. Steep slopes limit vehicle access. Weather changes rapidly. Visibility is often poor. In such terrain, large formations cannot easily maneuver. They compress into columns. Columns are vulnerable. A single destroyed bridge, tunnel, or overpass can halt thousands of vehicles. In high elevation environments, even basic mechanical reliability becomes an issue. Engines lose power. Braking systems overheat. Ice and snow reduce traction. Every problem compounds, and defenders do not need to defeat an invading force head-on. They only need to slow it, delay after delay, ambush after ambush. Each pause consumes fuel, food, and morale. Meanwhile, defenders are operating close to their homes and stockpiles. They do not have to ship supplies across oceans. They do not have to protect thousand-mile-long lifelines. They simply endure. Which brings us to a factor that often receives more attention in slogans than in serious analysis. The population. The United States has one of the largest civilian-owned firearm totals in the world, according to public international surveys. Exact figures vary, and estimates change over time, but multiple reputable reports suggest that civilian firearms number in the hundreds of millions. More important than the raw number is the culture surrounding them. In many regions, hunting, shooting sports, and firearm familiarity are common. Millions of Americans grow up learning how to handle weapons safely. Additionally, public demographic data indicates that the country has millions of military veterans. Many have experience with communications, logistics, engineering, medical support, or small unit tactics. None of this means civilians become a conventional army, but history demonstrates something consistent. When a large, motivated population resists occupation, the occupier faces an exhausting, long-term struggle, not dramatic front-line battles. Instead, roadside disruptions, sabotage, sniping, supply theft, constant uncertainty. No single decisive engagement, just continuous pressure. Occupying forces must guard supply depots, roads, power stations, water facilities, warehouses, and communication hubs. The manpower required for this is enormous. Public military studies from various historical conflicts suggest that stabilizing hostile populations often requires many security personnel per thousand inhabitants. When applied to a country with hundreds of millions of people, the numbers quickly exceed what any modern nation can realistically deploy overseas. And there is an important psychological element. The United States is not a single centralized culture. It is a federation of states, counties, towns, and communities with strong local identities. If one city falls, others do not automatically surrender. If one region is occupied, neighboring regions do not suddenly cooperate. Resistance becomes decentralized. There is no single switch to flip that ends opposition. From an ethical standpoint, it's also important to acknowledge something. Islamic teachings emphasize justice, the sanctity of innocent life, and the prohibition of aggression and oppression. Even when analyzing hypothetical conflicts, we should remember that war brings suffering primarily to civilians. No scenario like this is something to celebrate. The purpose of this discussion is not to glorify destruction. It is to understand why large-scale aggression carries enormous human and material costs. Now zoom out from the battlefield and look at economics. The United States plays a central role in global trade, finance, technology, and data infrastructure. Public reports indicate that a significant portion of global transactions are denominated in US dollars. From an Islamic perspective, we recognize that interest-based systems dominate modern finance, and Muslims are encouraged to avoid riba in personal dealings. Still, the reality remains that global markets are interconnected. If the US economy were severely destabilized, shockwaves would travel through every major economy. Supply chains would break, currencies would fluctuate wildly, trade volumes would collapse. Even an aggressor nation would suffer immense internal economic stress. Factories depend on imported components. Energy markets are interconnected. Food prices respond to global conditions. Attempting to conquer a nation so deeply woven into the world economy would be like deliberately detonating a device in the middle of a shared marketplace. Everyone gets hurt, including the one who triggered it. And finally, there is the challenge of governance. Winning battles is not the same as running a country. The United States operates through layered systems of local, state, and federal administration. Thousands of municipalities, tens of thousands of elected officials, courts, agencies, school boards, utility districts. Replacing or controlling this network would require an administrative apparatus of staggering size. Even if an invading power installed its own officials, it would still need cooperation from millions of workers to keep water flowing, electricity running, hospitals operating, and food distributed. Without that cooperation, nothing functions. History shows that populations under occupation often engage in passive resistance, slowdowns, strikes, non-compliance, work stoppages. These actions don't make headlines like battles, but they quietly grind occupiers down. So when you step back and examine the full picture, a pattern emerges. Distance blocks you, terrain slows you, logistics weaken you, population resists you, economics punish you, administration overwhelms you. Not because any country is invincible, not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because the combination of these factors makes successful large-scale occupation extraordinarily unlikely. Before we move on in the next part, I want to ask you something. Which do you think poses the greatest obstacle in this scenario? The oceans, the mountains, the distances, or the civilian resistance? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now let's go deeper, because up to this point we've mostly talked about reaching the United States and pushing inward. But the real trap isn't just the coastline or the mountains. It's what happens after you're inside. Because conquering land is one thing. Sustaining control over a continent-sized country is something else entirely. And the moment you try, you collide with a problem that has ended more campaigns than enemy bullets ever did, keeping an army fed, fueled, repaired, and coordinated day after day, week after week, month after month. At first, the plan looks simple on a war map. You draw arrows, you circle major cities, you label objectives. Then reality steps in. Your vehicles wear down, tires shred, engines fail, track links snap, people get sick, ammunition gets consumed, medical supplies disappear faster than expected. A single damaged bridge delays a convoy for days, and the whole schedule slips. A shortage of spare parts turns a powerful unit into a line of parked metal. And the United States, even without a military, is uniquely good at turning that slow decay into a collapse. Here's why. The American interior is not shaped like Europe, where nations and major cities are packed close together. It is vast, spread out, and threaded with long transportation routes that rely on key choke points. If you've ever watched how a small traffic accident can clog an entire highway for hours, you already understand the concept. Complex systems are efficient when intact and fragile when disrupted. America's infrastructure was built for commerce, not occupation. The roads, bridges, rail hubs, and ports are designed to move consumer goods quickly under normal conditions. But in an invasion scenario, those same systems become puzzles with a million ways to break them. Think about bridges alone. Public infrastructure databases suggest the US has hundreds of thousands of bridges. Not every bridge matters, but some bridges are vital. A small number carry huge portions of freight traffic. Some sit over rivers that are too wide to cross easily without engineering support. Some connect regions where alternate routes are limited. A defender does not need to destroy everything. They only need to break the right things. A few key crossings over major waterways, a handful of tunnels through mountains, a few high-capacity interchanges near metropolitan areas, and suddenly the invading force is forced into detours that add hundreds of miles. Hundreds of miles means more fuel. More fuel means more supply convoys. More convoys means more targets. And that's the start of a feedback loop you don't want. Because the deeper you drive into the United States, the further you get from your own resupply points. You become like a diver swimming farther from the shore, carrying less oxygen with every stroke. Now add the geography we mentioned earlier. Large rivers slice the US into sections. The Mississippi and its tributaries form a massive inland water network. Under normal conditions, it's an economic superhighway. Under invasion conditions, it can become a barrier that breaks your momentum. If defenders disable key bridges, your vehicles stack up at crossings. You can try to build temporary bridges, but that takes time, engineering equipment, and protection. And you're building it while being watched from woods, rooftops, or hillsides. Even if the defenders have no fighter jets, they don't need them. You can sabotage a temporary bridge with very simple means, and then the psychological burden begins. Your soldiers learn that no crossing is safe. Every delay increases stress. Every convoy requires larger escorts. Every escort pulls manpower away from the front. This is how an occupation bleeds, not in one dramatic collapse, but in thousands of cuts. Now let's talk rail. The United States has one of the most extensive freight rail systems in the world. Public transport studies often highlight how efficient it is at moving bulk goods over long distances. That's great for commerce. For an invader, it looks like a gift. Perfect. You think? We'll use their rail lines, but the rail system is complex and vulnerable. It depends on switching yards, scheduling software, signaling, maintenance crews, power systems, fuel distribution, and specialized locomotives. Disrupt a few rail hubs and the whole network can slow dramatically. Even without explosives, rail sabotage can be surprisingly low, tech disabling signals, damaging switches, blocking tracks, derailing key cars, destroying control centers. And the people who understand those systems best are the ones who run them. If rail workers refuse to cooperate, or quietly misplace equipment, delay repairs, or feed false information into dispatch systems, the system becomes unreliable. You can't just replace them overnight. You can't import thousands of experienced railroad operators into a hostile environment and expect them to perform perfectly while under constant threat. So you fall back to trucks, which brings us to the most brutal fact in any modern campaign. Trucks drink fuel like thirsty giants. Fuel is life. No fuel means no movement. No movement means no control. Even in peaceful countries, fuel distribution depends on pipelines, refineries, trucking routes, and storage facilities. In a war zone, those become the first targets. And here's the irony: the United States produces a lot of energy and has large-scale refining capacity, but that capacity is concentrated in key locations. Refineries and pipeline networks are not easy to protect everywhere all at once. Disable them, and distribution becomes chaotic. Also, if defenders adopt a scorched earth mindset, shutting down critical facilities before letting them fall, your plan to capture and use infrastructure collapses. And I want to be careful here, because we're not giving any operational guidance. We're talking at a high level about a well-known principle from military history: infrastructure denial is a common defensive strategy. So your tanks roll into a region expecting to refuel, and there's nothing. Storage tanks empty, supply depots sabotaged, distribution disrupted. Now you're in the situation every invader fears. You are surrounded by things you can see but cannot use. You can see highways, but they're blocked. You can see fuel stations, but they're dry. You can see rail lines, but the signals are dead. You can see cities, but the population is hostile. You have entered what we could call a logistical sinkhole. The deeper you go, the more force you need just to maintain what you already took. And that's before we discuss cities. Because cities are where invasion fantasies go to die. A lot of people imagine war like a chessboard. You take the capital, the game ends. But modern nations don't work like that, and the United States especially doesn't. Even if Washington, D.C. is captured, the country doesn't simply stop. Government functions are distributed. Economic production is distributed. Food production is distributed. Power generation is distributed. And the population is distributed across thousands of communities. Cities create a separate nightmare density. Dense urban terrain forces close combat. Buildings provide infinite hiding places. Streets create choke points. Bridges, tunnels, and overpasses become traps. Even if you don't face a formal military, you face friction, barricades, civilian vehicles blocking intersections, crowds refusing to disperse, work stoppages, utility disruptions, and something else: the fog of information. In any occupation, your biggest enemy is uncertainty. Is that a broken down car or a deliberate roadblock? Is that crowd peaceful or covering an ambush? Is that building empty or occupied? Is the mayor cooperating or stalling? You don't know, and uncertainty slows everything. Now imagine that problem scaled across dozens of major metropolitan areas. And while you're trying to manage cities, you still need the countryside, because the countryside is where you eat. America's agricultural output is huge by global standards, according to public agricultural data. Crops, livestock, grain storage, transport routes. These are the veins that feed cities. If you can't control food distribution, you can't control people. But controlling farmland is not like controlling a palace. It's spread out. It's open. It's impossible to guard completely. And here's where the civilian factor becomes even more decisive. If resistance becomes local, you don't fight one enemy. You fight thousands of small, independent groups with different methods, different leaders, and different motivations. Some resist openly. Some resist quietly. Some simply refuse to cooperate and wait you out. This kind of resistance is difficult to defeat because there is no central command to destroy. Even if you win in one county, the next county becomes a new problem, and your manpower gets stretched thin. Now let's link this to the idea of occupation math, without pretending we can state a precise universal rule. Public academic and military studies on past occupations suggest that stabilizing hostile populations often requires substantial security presence relative to population size. The exact ratio depends on many factors and is debated, but the principle is consistent. If the population is large and unwilling, occupation becomes extremely manpower intensive. Apply that to a country with hundreds of millions of people. The numbers become unrealistic for any external power. You might be able to take ground, but holding it means garrisoning it. Garrisoning means checkpoints, patrols, intelligence, protection of power plants, water facilities, hospitals, rail yards and warehouses. Even if you brought several million troops, which itself would be nearly impossible logistically, you would still face a basic issue. Your soldiers are far from home. The defenders are not. Every day you stay, your costs rise. Every day you stay, their knowledge advantage grows. They learn your routines. They map your patrol routes. They observe your convoy schedules. You can change patterns, but that creates inefficiency, and inefficiency increases costs. Now let's zoom out again to something people underestimate: administrative resistance. Even without violence, a population can make governance miserable. Imagine trying to run a city where every paperwork process slows down, where every utility repair takes twice as long, where every official claims confusion, where every supply request mysteriously gets lost, where every announcement is mocked and ignored. This is not cinematic, it's worse, because it drains time and morale. It makes your occupation feel like trying to hold water in your hands. And in the United States, you have layered governance everywhere: federal, state, county, municipal, and thousands of specialized districts. So you're not just replacing one leadership. You're trying to force obedience out of a complicated machine built to argue with itself even in peacetime. That's not an insult. It's a cultural feature. Americans debate laws openly, challenge authorities in court, protest policies, and resist regulations across the political spectrum. Now imagine that same spirit directed toward a foreign occupier. Even if you try to rule with force, you trigger more resistance. Even if you try to rule with incentives, you run into ethical problems and practical limits. You cannot buy off everyone. And here we should add an Islamic adab reminder. In times of instability, exploiting civilians, hoarding essentials, or profiting from suffering is morally corrupt. Islam emphasizes justice, honesty, and protecting the vulnerable. So in a responsible discussion like this, we can recognize that the ethical response to crisis is not predation. It is restraint, fairness, and care for human life. Now comes the victory paradox. Let's say you've accomplished what seems impossible. You have major ports. You hold coastal cities. You control sections of highways. You have footholds inland. You are, in a narrow sense, winning. And then the global economy begins to punish everyone. The United States isn't just a large country. It is a central node in global finance, trade, technology, and corporate networks. Public reports show global supply chains are tightly intertwined with American companies, American consumer markets, and American financial infrastructure. If the US is destabilized, insurers panic, shipping contracts get cancelled, currency markets swing, oil prices jump, technology services degrade, international investment freezes. In an interconnected world, the aggressor can't isolate itself from the consequences. Your own economy begins to shake. Your own population begins to feel shortages. Your own businesses lose access to components and markets. And if you were hoping to loot the US economy, you discover a harsh truth. Advanced economies are not piles of gold sitting in vaults. Their wealth is in systems, in trust, in functioning institutions, in skilled people. If those systems collapse, the value collapses too. So by smashing the machine you wanted to take, you may destroy the very prize you came for. And that leads to the most sobering conclusion of this entire thought experiment. Even a successful invasion can look like failure, because you inherit chaos, you inherit resistance, you inherit a shattered economy, you inherit a global backlash, you inherit the burden of rebuilding, feeding, and policing an enormous population that never asked for you. So let's pause here and check the logic. The ocean crossing is hard, neighbor routes are harsh, mountains slow movement, civilian resistance makes occupation costly, infrastructure is fragile in the wrong places, and governance becomes a daily struggle. This isn't about calling any nation superhuman. It's about recognizing that geography and logistics can create defense even when armies are absent. Now here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to read your answers. If you were designing a country to be hard to occupy, not with weapons, but with terrain and distance, what features would you choose? Mountains, rivers, deserts, isolation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Whatever your views, remember this. Seek knowledge with humility, speak with honesty, act with justice, and never forget the human cost behind every headline. Thanks for watching.